Good afternoon. Thank you for tuning in to She Shares Conversation with California Chief Justice Tani Cantil-Sakauye. My name is Linda White with the BMW Group, and I am a proud sponsor and supporter of She Shares. On behalf of She Shares, I would like to welcome you all to the 10th season of this conversation series. That's right, 10th season. This series started in 2012 in Sacramento as a way for women to be inspired by trailblazing women, networking with one another, and mentor young women through our mentorship program. Before we get to the program, I'd like to recognize our sponsors: the Thomas Law Group, Lucas Public Affairs, Kaiser, Sutter Health, Array Our Health Group, Nima Lapapis and Associates, Blue Shield of California, PG&E, BMW of North America, Politico, Calpine, the California Center for Civic Participation, Dewey Square Group, Torlix and Events, Dry Bar, KCRA3, Comstocks, and Capital Public Radio. All of these sponsors makes it possible for us to do the programming, especially the mentorship program. This year, we have 68 pairs, which means we have 136 women participating in the program, a record here for us. The objective for the program, as stated, is to pair up young women who are new in their career with women who are a little further along in their career path. Participants attend workshops throughout the year where they have the ability to work on their professional and personal development skills. My daughter, Brianna, went through this program years ago, and I was pleased to see just the impression She Shares had on her. And now I'd like to introduce our featured speaker, who will introduce our Chief Justice. I'll turn it over now to Hannah Sakauye.
Thank you, Linda, and thank you, She Shares, for this great event. I'm so happy to introduce today's guest speaker, my mom, the Chief Justice of California, Tani Cantil-Sakauye, who is She Shares' first guest speaker back in 2012. Here to interview her today is also our original She Shares moderator, Karen Breslau of Feature Well Stories. Karen is a former correspondent for Newsweek, an author, and a wonderful storyteller. I want to share one thing my mom always tells my sister and me. It is to be the best you that you can be. She gives us advice on how to be these best versions of ourselves. But the greatest thing is that we see every day how she strives to be the best her that she can be. She tells us to work hard, and every day when she probably thinks we aren't paying any attention, we can see her embodying her own advice when she spends hours annotating her cases or getting up early on the weekends in the morning to run, then to read her work before most of the house is awake. She tells us to take advantage of opportunities, advocate for ourselves, and so much more. But seeing the behind-the-scenes work she puts in to make the best version of herself and watching how she makes being the Chief Justice seems effortless. This is really transformative to watch her personify her own advice, because it really draws the line between she's our mom, so she has to tell us these things, and that her advice is well-grounded since we see her live it every day. Now, please welcome my mom, Chief Justice of California, Tani Cantil-Sakauye, and Karen Breslau to the screen.
Thank you, Hannah, and welcome back to She Shares, Chief Justice. Listening to your impressive daughter, I would imagine that of all your titles and honors, being her parent must be at the top of your list. So thank you so much, Hannah, and welcome to all of you. It's hard to believe that we're kicking off the 10th season of She Shares with our virtual reunion during a pandemic, isn't it? It's kind of amazing. And in thinking back to our first event, where you were our first guest, there were two big revelations, and I just wanted to take a brief walk down memory lane with you. So first, everybody loves to dish. we launched She Shares as an experiment, wondering whether trailblazing women like yourself would or even could be authentic and open in sharing their backstories, their real stories, including all the weird stuff that happens along the way that might inform and inspire other women, and especially young women who are emerging as leaders in their own right and weighing their hopes and dreams against risks and obstacles, which is something I think that all women struggle with. And you laid that question to rest at our first She Shares nearly 10 years ago. You laid out in a very unvarnished way your journey as the daughter of migrant farm workers who came to California from the Philippines and lived with discrimination and class barriers and economic struggles. You told us about your family being evicted when you were a child and how that shaped your early view of justice and the court system, about being the only non-white family on your block, the first to go to college, how you paid your way through law school by working one summer as a blackjack dealer. I think it was in Reno, and you learned there how to read people at the card table, especially people pretending to be drunk. And that's kind of wild. But that helped you get really shrewd at picking juries once you became a lawyer. And there may have even been a run on casino jobs by law students after that little tip. So thank you for setting the bar high for candor and for really embracing our philosophy of paying it forward. And the dozens of speakers and the hundreds of mentor pairs from She Shares have strived to match that standard ever since. So you set the bar. The second revelation was the incredible foresight of our friend Karen Skelton, She Shares co-creator and founding sponsor. In 2012, Karen was fresh off producing Maria Shriver's Women's Conference, and she was convinced that there was a hunger for these real stories from women with big names, living big lives, and that all we had to do was set the stage. And that's exactly what we did. So here we are, kicking off the 10th season, and Karen, of course, was planning to join us today, but in true Karen style, earlier this week, she returned to Washington, D.C. to become senior advisor to President Biden's newly confirmed Secretary of Energy, Jennifer Granholm, another She Shares alumna. And on behalf of She Shares, we all want to wish Karen and Secretary Granholm so much success in leading our country to a clean and secure energy future. And we also want to thank them for stepping up to public service again. Chief Justice, you've now been our chief for 10 years. Congratulations. And we know it's not easy. And we know that you and your family make sacrifices to serve in the public sector. So thank you. And shout out to Karen. So we have been through a mind-bending year. And when you look at the epic events of the past 12 months, whether it's this terrible pandemic or the national uprising for racial justice, the assault on the U.S. Capitol, the spread of ever more bizarre conspiracy theories, I wanted to start by asking you, which of these parade of horribles concerns you the most and why?
Thank you, Karen. It is a privilege to be interviewed by you again, and thank you for lending your tremendous skills to an interview with me. I also want to thank Linda for her introduction, and of course, Hannah. And Hannah knows that my greatest avocation in life is being her mother and Claire's mother, and what they have taught me could fill warehouses. It is a privilege to be here, and I thank She Shares, and I'm so thrilled for our friend Karen. Karen Skelton and I went to high school together, and she was a force to be reckoned with then. And so with Jennifer Granholm, DC will not be the same, and I'm looking forward to that.
Absolutely not. Yeah. What's up?
I would say to your question, I think of all that you have described in our year, that the biggest issue, I think, for me has been the understanding of the deficit of equity and inclusion in the United States that had manifested itself through the killings of Black men by law enforcement that started up the conversation of Black Lives Matter, and then the greater conversation of the lack of equity and inclusion in our government, in our private sector, in our public sector. And also, I want to say the knowledge of that on young people and the recollection of it for the rest of us, and how that imploded and really took over all of the conversations and really dominates every conversation. It dominates the virus and its vaccine rollout. It dominates the economics of the vaccine. It dominates the lawsuits that are being brought, and it dominates conspiracy theories, because who's behind those conspiracy theories? So certainly that's the resonating issue of the year and beyond, because we know that we have a lot of work to do.
And you have made, I want to add, I'm sure you also meant to include the Black women who have also died in violent episodes, obviously Breonna Taylor, the entire Say Her Name movement. So you have made it really a cornerstone of your tenure as Chief Justice in California to have California courts and the judiciary look like our very diverse state. Can you talk about your progress over your 10 years, and congratulations, by the way, for the 10-year anniversary as Chief Justice.
Thank you. I appreciate that. It's gone quickly. I will say that working with the governor's office and with the support of our legislature, there has been a great deal of emphasis, at least in the last 10 years, and probably even a few years before that, that actually put the emphasis on filling the pipeline, not only to law school, but the pipeline to lawyership and the pipeline to the judiciary, based on the collective leadership and voices of the legislature and the judiciary and the legal bar associations, to tell the governor, appoint diverse people who look like California. And that has been truly, I think, the mission of the last several sets of governors, because at least I can tell you in the judiciary, every population of judge in terms of racial or gender background has increased in the last 15 years, and conversely, the only population that has decreased in judgeships have been white males. And we've seen firsts across the board, but we've also seen our staffs, and we've seen outreach, and we do civic programs in order to bring in diverse candidates for all levels of positions in the court, because it's important that the judiciary, where you go to settle your disputes, looks like and is like the community that we live in order that it be welcoming and inclusive and compassionate and understanding, and you are comfortable and at your best when you are fighting your case.
And people in courthouses are often having some of the worst days of their lives, right? Nobody actually, maybe except for the people who are getting paid, wants to be there, right? People go to court because they have to. So I appreciate that, and I remember that was really one of your first goals, because when you became Chief Justice a decade ago, the bench was 72% white, and our state obviously is vastly different. So I want to go back to the conspiracy thing. And at our first event in 2012, Tina Thomas, one of our founding sponsors, along with Donna Lucas, asked, "What keeps you up at night?" And I want our audience to see how you answered then. And so let's take a look at that video, and then we'll talk about it.
What I find that wakes me up in the middle of the night, and I find I'm gritting my teeth, and maybe is all the false information that's out there that seems to be getting play. That is so disturbing to me. The branch, the judges, lawyers, when you go to in court, the facts are holy. They're holy, and that's our starting point, as you know, because it's the misinformation that damages us. You know what else keeps me awake at night is the absolutely incivil, whatever the word is, lack of civility that we're having in discourse, not only amongst the branch, but at the legislative level. It just destroys us. It destroys our credibility. We're hurting ourselves. We're inflicting our own injuries by degrading one another.
Wow. So this was 2012, first term of President Obama. Nobody had heard of deep fakes. Nobody had heard of QAnon. Donald Trump had not yet glided down the golden elevator and into the White House. The insurrection at the Capitol was almost 9 years into the future. What did you see in your crystal ball that troubled you so?
Well, Karen, what the courts see, we see the manifestation of illness, damage, and injury in the community. And so what we see are the snapshots of difficulties of people's lives in the litigation and the allegations being made. And so for me to see that is really based on what I was seeing in court and had seen both in my years as a trial judge and the years as an appellate justice. And then when I became chief and I was just starting out as chief, I saw how much this misinformation and lack of civility tore us apart, where we couldn't even get to the facts because the venom and the noise and the toxicity is so high that we can't even get into a room to trust each other, to exchange facts in a calm way in order to reach resolution or a negotiation. And so I was seeing a lot of that, and then it exploded. And then what I never really expected and couldn't have predicted is that it would be modeled at our topmost levels of government, and people would take that up and form committees and groups around that kind of behavior.
And it's interesting because I think what you're describing, I mean, we're really well over a decade into the era of what President Obama calls truth decay, which I think is a perfect term. And President Trump, was not the originator. Maybe he was the product. I think we're all still hashing out this history. So here we are, the first decade of truth decay is behind us. What are the remedies that you see?
Well, the remedies that I have seen and that I think have tried in my third branch lane do is to really push for adult civics and civics learning. And by that, I don't mean just government. I mean that there is an explanation of three branches and how we work together in a functioning democracy. And luckily, we have tremendous partners in the legislature and in the governor's office to convene and to speak to their constituents, our constituents, and the public, K through 12, with adult education as well. And what it really is a means of explaining the three branches of government and the levers of power. And it also means to teach and to discuss critical thinking, and that is asking questions about the source of the information and maybe the bias of the information, and maybe seeking out several sources. We encourage critical thinking, that you look to several sources for the facts. And then we encourage you to come to your own opinion, use your own wonderful mind and the gifts you have, and figure out the facts and have those discussions. And that's what moves the ball forward. And we hope that encourages honest young leadership, young people who want to get involved in government and who want to be part of city councils and county boards of supervisors and school districts and mayors, and run for the legislature and run for Congress, so that we give them the tools they need, not only to work in this environment and to know government and to know the levels of government, but to bring strong skills, a strong foundation that makes them able to handle any crisis, because they will bring an outline of critical thinking to it.
And before the pandemic, in addition to your rather busy day job running the largest court system in the country, you actually were going to high schools and you were talking to students. You were sitting there in classrooms and hanging out with teenagers and presenting this civics curriculum that as I understand it, you and your staff helped to design. What was the most surprising thing you heard from students? What surprised you?
What surprises me in a positive way is that students were so eager to ask questions and learn and find out behind the scenes things. And when you prep students a bit, and we have a power of democracy committee that's statewide that brings together federal judges, state judges, lawyers, business leaders, educators across the board. We brought them together. They exist statewide. They work in each county. We have different programs where we partner. And we partner with the superintendent of public instruction, Tony Thurmond, as well, to reach all schools. The surprising thing is how hungry these students are for information and to be engaged. And they ask the best questions because it's not about frills. It's direct, and they want to know, what are you thinking and how do you decide things? And they're hungry for it, and they soak it up, and then they become involved in their own government and their own community. And it also brings a thirst for people who never thought about college to actually think about it, because now there's something that grabs their attention. It's not math, it's not science necessarily, but it's, I can be a leader, I can be of service in my community. And they ask questions that are beautiful and confounding, actually.
That is such a relief to hear, because, if you watch too much cable news, and maybe I'm guilty of that in the pandemic and before, but, we seem like a nation of civic illiterates, with people willing to clobber and kill in the name of a constitution they haven't even read. So it sounds like civic engagement is one of your main tools for bringing people, out of the conspiracy closets and into the light, right? And by light, I'm talking about participation in our civic life.
I will say too, when you teach children, they bring it home to their parents. And when your children are involved in projects, because with the power of democracy, we give prizes and we do awards for the best civics programs from K through 12. And then I go and Mr. Superintendent, used to be Superintendent Torlikson, but now it's Superintendent Thurmond. We'd go to the schools, we'd go with the mayor, we'd bring a lot of fanfare. The parents would come and they'd see, some children do tremendous projects on equity of bus stops, on voting rights, on Japanese internment. And they do it in a group, and they get to know each other, and they realize what a pleasure it is to work and present in group. And it also is contagious to the parents and to the teachers as well. So we're hoping to bring up new leadership and to bring up attention that they want to be involved, and they pay more attention when things are happening in the media.
Yeah, and I'm so happy to hear that. My daughter and I had the absolute privilege of being in New York a couple of years ago and seeing Heidi Schreck's play "What the Constitution Means to Me" on Broadway, and for a civics geek to walk out with my own little pocket copy of the Constitution, and it was thrilling to see different generations. And there was a young 14-year-old debate champion who took on, that the final scene of the play is debating whether the U.S. Constitution should be abolished or amended to rid of the baked-in inequalities. So that's wonderful to hear. I want to talk about your role leading the judicial branch of California during the Trump administration. And that, of course, California's leaders were clashed endlessly with the federal government over immigration policy, climate policy, the size of light bulbs, you name it. I think there were over 50 lawsuits filed by California against the United States government. So I want to start by asking you to first explain the role of the California Supreme Court and how it differs from that of the U.S. Supreme Court, and maybe some examples of how your court's decisions impact the daily lives of Californians.
Thank you. That's a terrific question. I will say that every state in the United States has the state's highest court. It's Supreme Court. New York has a different name. They call it the Court of Appeals, but we have one high court. And this is how I explain it to lots of folks. The judiciary in California, like the judiciary in every other state, is a 3-story house. On the first floor of the House are the trial courts, the superior courts. These are the courts you see on TV. Witness boxes, jury boxes, lots of people coming and going. If you have an issue with a legal matter, including changing your name, adopting a child, etc., getting a traffic ticket paid or challenged, you go to the first floor, the trial court. If you lose at the trial court on a felony or a civil case, you have, as a matter of right, the ability to go to the second floor. That's the Court of Appeal. And at the second floor, if you lose, you can ask to go to the High Court. You don't automatically get to go to the High Court, the Supreme Court, my court, unless we grant review, and a few other exceptions. A death penalty case will come directly to the California Supreme Court after the trial court. And the difference between us and the federal court and the California Supreme Court, our High Court, and the United States Supreme Court is we in California deal primarily with our California Constitution. And we deal primarily with all the laws our wise legislature and our wise governor sign into law. We are California centric. That's what our court is. And when, of course, one of our issues crosses over into implicating the United States Constitution, then the federal court will get involved. And they have the same 3-story house, only the top floor of their house is the United States Supreme Court. And that court is the court that rules the land. Our court in California, my court, the High Court, we only rule California, one of the largest states, of course, but under our California Constitution. If a question in California does not implicate the federal Constitution, we don't even involve the 3-story house of the federal court. And let me also be clear here, and that is that the state courts handle far more subject matters than the United States Supreme Court, because the federal Constitution doesn't have issues with divorce or unlawful detainer and evicting renters or evicting homeowners. So statewide, the United States Supreme Court has huge issues that affect the entire United States. We are California, our High Court. We are under the Constitution. We handle every matter. And we also, let me point out, we also, like most state courts, handle 90% of the litigation in the United States. State courts handle most of the litigation that occurs. The federal courts handle a good 10 to 15%, maybe 20% at best. But then again, they're the final word. We handle a much bigger menu of cases. And we are elected in California for a term, not for life. And so we have to continue to run for re-election. We sit 7, the United States Supreme Court sits 9, and we in California are appointed by the governor, and we stand election, unlike the president and unlike a life term.
And you were appointed to the bench at the astounding age of 30 by Republican Governor George Deukmejian, and then became Chief Justice under another Republican governor, Arnold Schwarzenegger. I want to note that one other thing happened during the Trump administration, which is that you stopped being a Republican. And even though judicial officers, these are nonpartisan offices, you are also a citizen and a voter. And as I understand it, you registered as an 18-year-old as a Republican. Is that right?
That's exactly right.
Yeah. So, yes.
No, go ahead.
Go ahead. Say more.
Go ahead, please.
Well, we're going to get there. Okay. So, but, in light of the polarization that we see today, it may be hard for the younger people in our audience to understand how the daughter of a working class immigrant family would identify as a Republican voter. And this would have been in the 1980s. So could you talk a little bit about what attracted you to the Republican Party as a young first-time voter in the 1980s?
I actually registered to vote in maybe 79, 77. Okay. And I will say the Republican Party of the 70s, 80s is not the Republican Party of today. I don't know, and I'll get to that in a minute. But I registered Republican because I was in my senior year at UC Davis undergrad. I needed units to graduate. I found an internship. The only person who would hire me in the Capitol was then Senator Jim Nielsen, a Republican. He interviewed me and said, well, if you want the job, you have to register as a Republican. And at that point, I was unregistered. I wanted the job. I registered as a Republican. It wasn't a political decision at the time. And then I found out that I, in fact, had enough units to graduate. So I never took the internship. And I was a Republican registered. Throughout law school, I never gave it a thought. And then as I was a prosecutor, in my first job out of law school, I didn't give it a thought. But it came up again when I applied to work on the governor's cabinet. The Governor Deukmejian was hiring for his inner circle. And when they asked me my party affiliation, I said, well, I am a Republican. And that, of course, conformed with Republican George Deukmejian. And I so respected George Deukmejian, who's passed away now. He was the governor in 1988 when I joined the governor's office. And at the time, his views resonated with me. I believed in reasonable law and order. I believed in what he was, fiscally conservative. He was also a person who was honestly a merit-based thinker about policies. He did much with welfare, and he was the first governor to sign a ban on assault rifles. So it's, in those days, George Deukmejian at least, you couldn't categorize him with one label. He was a lawyer himself, and he was very thoughtful. And I respected that, and I learned a lot in his administration. And it's true, I stayed Republican through my appointment and elevation by Governor Pete Wilson, and also my elevation and appointment by Governor Schwarzenegger. And I continued to be a Republican, even though, as you pointed out, judges are apolitical. We decide cases based on facts and the law. The law is made by our legislature, signed by the governor before it becomes a law, to become a law. And we write out our decisions. And I've not really felt any political influence from my colleagues who may be Democrat or whatever. And so it wasn't really until the Brett Kavanaugh hearings where I realized that the Republican value system, which I'd been questioning and talking about with friends, really was completely now out of sync with my own philosophies of life. And as has been said before, I don't think I left the Republican Party. I think they left me. And by that, I mean, it really changed and morphed into something that could no longer identify with. And particularly with watching the Kavanaugh hearings with my two daughters.
I'm curious, why was that the breaking point? Lots of things have gone on. What made those hearings the breaking point for you?
I think because I saw the visceralness of the faces of the questions and the attitudes of the questions. And to be honest, it bothered me as a prosecutor, as an attorney, as a judge, that the Senate would need to hire a woman to ask questions of the candidate. I just felt that was wrong, and it was a pivot. And everything came to light for me at that point regarding my views of how I should proceed. Yeah. And so I changed my Republican status to no party preference, which as it is today, because I think it truly does reflect my views and more my professional work.
And I'm imagining there's also perhaps the interaction with Christine Blasey Ford, who, of course, had brought forth accusations about sexual misconduct that she experienced, that she said she experienced with Kavanaugh decades earlier. So that there was that whole gender dynamic that
absolutely
was awful. Yeah. So also 2018, you stopped being a Republican, and after all these decades as a loyal, patriotic, polite Republican, you went kind of rogue. And when the Trump administration sent federal ICE agents to stake out California courthouses in search of undocumented people to arrest, you sent a letter to then Attorney Jeff Sessions and the Secretary of Homeland Security at the time, John Kelly, insisting that the federal government back off. And I may have garbled the chronology. Maybe you were still a Republican. But in any case, your office took the extraordinary step of making that letter public. And I'm wondering, why did that dragnet practice upset you so much to the point that you would publish that letter so that everybody would see it?
I did, in fact, write that letter when I was a Republican, but again, it was not part of my thought process. And I was, as Chief Justice of California, I knew that there were ICE agents in courthouses across the country. And I had been waiting, actually, and wondering if any of my colleague Chief Justices would speak up about agents, ICE agents, immigration agents in courthouses, taking people who were there to press their rights, who had every right to be there. And at courthouses, we presume a fair amount of safety in order to press your rights. And when no one spoke up, I just had it, because there had been recently a Pasadena arrest of an undocumented immigrant on the steps of the court. And so I was just so outraged by that act, because it's in terrible injustice, because number one, we provide laws for everyone, and even undocumented immigrants have a right to the laws that we pass. The protection does not determine your status. It doesn't turn on that. If you're here, you have the protection. You don't have the right to be taken care of. People don't get to take advantage of you because you're not documented or your documents in transit. And so when it happened at a court, as the head of the judiciary, my question to myself was, if I don't speak out, who will? And someone needs to speak out to another branch of government to tell them that they are interfering and trenching on the rights of people in the judiciary. And if the judiciary gets a reputation as being a place where our litigants and our witnesses are bait, then we will never recover from this. Our courthouses, at least in California, we try to make as welcoming as possible. We have child care centers. We have lactation centers. We have self-help kiosks. We provide interpreters at windows and in courtrooms. We try to welcome you and make the place less scary. We try to help you along to get justice for yourself. And to have and not know that you could be taken away and not see your family again while you're in court was something I could not tolerate, and I felt I had to speak out. And it caused a lot more press than I actually thought it would. And we published it because I wanted everyone who comes to court to know that we protect you when you're here. We try to give you your day in court, and we won't allow this. And I received some of the worst death threats of my life after that letter. And I've received quite a few, but these were pretty graphic. And surprisingly, they were coming from out of state, not from California.
I'm sorry you went through that. You spoke at our first She Shares, and I alluded to this earlier, about what it is like to be the child of an immigrant family, which feels extremely vulnerable. Just going about their daily lives. And your mother had an experience at court that you spoke about. I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit more about that and how it shaped your views of justice.
Thank you. My mother was an uneducated woman. She grew up picking crops along with her 9-member family. And they moved from crop to crop, and they slept in the fields, and they're very clannish Filipinos, but there are a number of them, and they moved up and down the West Coast. And even when I would take my mother driving somewhere, she'd say, "Oh, that field, I've slept in that field. And she didn't say it with regret or rancor. It was just some fond memories she had as a child. But when she was older, she was able to get a job for the state, an entry-level job. And my father and my mother and my grandmother, who had spent her entire life as a farm worker, they lived in an alley in downtown Sacramento in a family-built, family-owned compound. And they had a fence built around it. There was a brothel nearby. In the alley, there were lots of transients asleep. They didn't harm us. We just walked by them. It didn't feel unsafe. And government determined in Sacramento that it was blight, and they were going to come and tear everything down and build condos. And that's eminent domain, which I understand now, which I did not understand at 8 years of age, nor did my mother understand. And she went to court to try to fight it. And she went to court pro se without an attorney, and she came home. And all I remember about that experience is that she was crying and that she felt humiliated. She felt disrespected. And I'm sure she was obviously treated very poorly. And she could tell, she remembered the name of the judge. I know the name of the judge. How do you remember something like that when you're 8 years old? I remember being kicked out of our house. I remember leaving our house. I remember moving into a neighborhood where we were the only non-white family. And it caused trouble in our family. My grandmother's home was a gathering place for all my aunts and uncles and relatives. We were a big clan, a group of kids and grandkids and cousins. And that really disrupted our life. And that stays with you. That stays with you, along with now recollections of why my Caucasian aunt and my Filipino uncle had to go out of state to get married. At the time, you don't think about that, but it becomes a reflection as you get older and you hear about it. And so those things were matters that I learned early, or felt early, and it became a part of my feeling about treatment of people. And that if anything, we have to provide a court where people feel safe and respected to have a day in court, even if they lose, because there will be someone who perceives themselves as losing. Courts are 50% of the time, and that has really brought forth. It's informed my administration is about the treatment of people.
And you've talked about California courts as social justice centers, and it sounds like that derives very much from your experience.
It actually very much does, right? As you pointed out today earlier, court, no one goes to court for happy reasons, unless it's an adoption, and those are rare.
Right.
But
it's a scary place. Yeah.
Yeah, it's scary for everyone, even jurors. And so if you come, we want you to have faith that the laws you're there for, you're injured, you're damaged, you're accused, that you have the opportunity in a courtroom to be your most best self, to be relaxed, to know you're supported, to know there's no one has it out for you, and that we're going to provide an environment for you to test the evidence against you and or bring the case against the person that you have accused. And that's all we can ask for, is a fair forum, an open, fair, compassionate, kind forum, because we promised you this under a democracy. We've promised you the law, and we've promised you equal access, and that means equal treatment.
I want to just let our audience know we're going to be moving to audience questions shortly. So if you have not yet put your question in the chat box, please go ahead and do that. And I would happily keep asking all my questions, but I do want to share some of your wisdom and the audience's wisdom with you. So I would like to shift a little bit into the mentorship piece of She Shares, which is critical, and it's really a key reason that we launched this program. For young women out there thinking about the law or becoming a judge or a justice, what do you wish someone had told you early on? Like how to deal blackjack? I mean, what do you wish you had known?
I wish someone had told me early on to trust your voice, trust your instincts, and be brave and make yourself heard. It's true that you want to be civil about it, because civility is the doorway, right, from which we can enter into resolution and negotiation, and even conflict if it comes to that. But I think if someone could tell you, you have every building block you need right now. And if you could have confidence in yourself and not take away negatives from every encounter, find lessons to build yourself, find lessons to learn, make yourself into the better you, if you did this sooner, you'll reap benefits earlier.
Who are the women in the law who inspired you? Who are your role models in the legal profession, living or gone?
Well, I would say gone would be Carol Miller, Judge Carol Miller. She was one of the first few female judges in Sacramento, and I had a number of cases in front of her. And she came to the law late. She came to the law after raising her family. She was a beautiful blonde woman, very petite, constant smoker, and she was so full of fire. And she would just cut off, particularly men, because it was mostly a male environment. And she would shoo them out of her chamber, and she would say things. She would mother them a little bit. I don't expect to hear that on the bench. She was so comfortable and such a natural. She was really who she was. She passed away many years ago, but I was a young lawyer and I learned a lot from her. I would also say Jane Muir. She was one of my lead supervisors when I was a young prosecutor, and she just took no BS. And she had a look on her face, you knew you were in trouble from a mile away on Jane Muir's face. And yet she was one of the best, most compassionate attorneys I've ever known, but she took no nonsense. And she's retired now, and every now and then I hear from her, and I admire her so much. And I've learned that in a male-dominated profession early on, at least in the 80s. It doesn't matter your gender. I don't care. I'm only listening to your argument, and I am going to be fair with you when I disagree with you, and I'm going to be brusque about it, and there's not going to be any game playing. And I learned that from those women. And there are other women along the way, too. I still learn every day from Justice Carol Corrigan. She is my colleague on the California Supreme Court. She's fantastic. She's just direct. She's so smart, so practical, and she delivers legal analysis always with humor, and she's always so self-deprecating that I learn every day from her. It's from my colleagues.
It's great to hear you mention the names of judges who, are obviously we can't all encounter Justice Ginsburg, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, or Sandra Day O'Connor, or Sonia Sotomayor, or Elena Kagan, and but there are women throughout the judicial system making smart decisions and doing their homework. And challenging people. So I really love that. And I want to ask, we're going to shift to audience questions in just 1 minute, but you were nominated to appointed to the bench at the age of 30. So how does a 30-year-old person sit there? You're talking to, I assume, sort of silver-haired gentlemen, decades older than you, and telling them what's what. How did that go down? How did you find the confidence to do that?
Well, it wasn't all smooth sailing, especially because I had been an attorney in Sacramento County. So I knew most of them, but I only knew them as rivals or allies if they were out of the prosecutor's office. So it was rough sailing, and I learned a few things. And my favorite line was, I would go off record. I'd ask my court reporter not to take this, and I'd lean over to the bench and I'd say to the male attorney, I am not your girlfriend. I am not your wife. You do not get to argue with me. You get to make your argument, you submit, and then I speak. And a few times I went off the record and told attorneys who kept interrupting me, they're males. I mean, that's my time in the courts, in the trial courts. Male attorney. I would say, if you keep interrupting and you keep making a mess of this record for appeal, my court reporter will not take you down. She's only going to take me. So stop talking over me. Stop interrupting me, because I am not going to let you make your record. Then we'd go back on record as if that didn't happen, and we would make a nice record.
There you go.
Yeah.
That's how it works. Okay. Well, good. I hope everybody was taking notes there. We have just a ton of questions here. So I'm going to switch now to our audience questions. This is from Rhonda Lyons from Cal Matters. Okay. What is the greatest challenge facing California courts? And if you can, how will you address the issue?
Thank you. And I love Cal Matters, read it every day. Let me say, at this point in time, the greatest challenge facing the California courts is the pandemic, because we have stayed open throughout the pandemic. But it's been rocky because we keep having to interrupt trials because jurors get exposed, a witness becomes ill, we have to stop and mistry the case, and because we've transitioned to mostly remote. But there is an economic digital divide where so many people cannot access the courts remotely, yet they are victims of wage theft or domestic violence or any other kind of violence. So we are having difficulty trying to dispense justice during COVID. Afterward, there will be a backlog. We know that we will have to get to cases, and there's a lot of misery in COVID, as we all have imagined and witnessed and read about, and all of that comes to the court. So that's the biggest challenge we face. And we are lucky that our legislature has recently held a hearing and we are in communication with them. The governor's office is also very concerned and open to hearing our issues and is working with us and has made several proposals in his budget that looks to help remedy the problem. So while it's a huge problem, we have great minds on it.
Excellent. And one of our questioners, I believe this is Mary, asked, apropos pandemic, what self-care have you been going through? I would imagine the complexities you talked about. How do you get through these complicated days and uncharted everything that we're all dealing with? But as a Chief Justice and a person with a highly visible job, how do you cope? I hope
Thanks,
I did Mary.
I hope like you, in the sense that I rely on good people. I try to surround myself with good people. I have a tremendous family with Hannah and Claire and my husband, Mark. But I also have tremendous assistance with work from my attorneys who I've known and had for years now. So we're very comfortable with each other on all modes of communication, even though we're not in person. And the same is true of my judicial colleagues. And the same is true of friends, right? So we all have cohorts. I have cohorts from law school. I have cohorts, lawyers and judges and cohort friends. And we share and we are honest, we lament, and we try to cheer each other up. And we continue most of the time to try to do the right thing, exercise, sleep. But, lots of donuts at my house, lots of candy at my house, lots of things like that, because we have to get through it, and no one's getting through it perfectly. Thank you for the question.
We're all human. Donna Lucas has a question, which is, what advice would you give to women struggling to as ever, to balance family, kids, parents, and career, made especially awful during the pandemic? I mean, how many of us have seen our poor colleagues, with their first graders hanging around their necks while they're trying to do their work? And what advice?
Hi, Donna. Thank you, Donna, for all of your leadership. Thank you for all of your work. You continue to wow. And I appreciate your question. I think that I think balance is an overused word when it comes to our lives and all that we seek to accomplish in it. And I think we all need to give ourselves a break. There's no ideal of perfection. And if anyone has it and they're showing it on Facebook, they're lying. I think we have days where we're all just at the end, where we all want to just lay in bed. My advice is that there is no wrong way to do this. I really feel for young women and men who are families, period, that have young children at home who are Zoom learning or partially Zoom learning. Thank you, at least, Donna, you and I Sounds like Karen. Our children are not at school right now. They are out. Thank goodness. I can't even imagine if they were in K through 12 trying to learn remotely or had to rely on me to help teach. But I want to say, treat yourself with compassion. Know this isn't going to last forever. Yeah, I know you're doing your best. And on the days that you can't do your best, give yourself a break and try again tomorrow. But take care of yourself. Take care of yourself, because if you're no good to you can't be of any good to anyone if you're not good to yourself. And no one is judging. And there is no balance. People used to say to me, oh, how do you balance life and work? And I say, objection, facts, not in evidence. There is not balance.
Yeah.
But I'm doing the best I can.
Yeah, it's a split screen, isn't it? Craig Davis has a question for you, and that is, can you comment on how your experience at Sac City College or in community college in general helped shape you as an adult and prepared you for your future academic journey and career? And there are so many community college students, including those at Sac City College out there. So could you talk to those students?
Thank you, Karen. I would love to. Thank you, Craig. I will tell you that going to a community college was the greatest education experience I have ever had. And I'll tell you why. I came out of high school not knowing anything, just being basically naive and green. And I only knew my high school friends and their ideas and thoughts. I went to a community college, and the beauty of a community college is the fact that all the students are different. I had never met a divorced woman before or the manager at JCPenney, but community colleges bring a lot of different people in different parts of their life at different stages together. We're sitting in a classroom and we're talking things through, and the points of view are so real and so exciting and so funny, because people come and speak about their life in community college from a place of reality. And I came away making some of the best friends, knowing people I would never have gotten to know in my life. My best and favorite teacher came out of a community college. He's now passed away, and his name was Ken Lynch at Sac City College. And he was the speech coach and the professor there. And he always said to me, you never know what you don't know. And I would say, oh, I can't do that. And he'd say, how can you know at 18 what you can and can't do? And I use that line with my children every day. How can you know what you can and can't do? And it taught me about people and different people, and it was a warm environment. I recommend, if you are in a community college, that you join one of the community college clubs, because that's where you get to know all the diversity of career and age and experience in a club with people. I joined the speech and debate club only because, honestly, at the time, I wanted to travel, and I'd never been out of Sacramento, and places like San Jose and Merced College sounded pretty exciting to me, and we got there on a bus. That was a thrill. To this day, I have hilarious memories of that. And so you can get great experience at a community college, and you grow up in a community college. And I can say wonderful things about a community college because I am such a fan.
And in a very cost-effective way, too. These community colleges are very affordable. We have time for one last question, and Chief Justice, we'll make this kind of quick because we have about 2 minutes. Kirsten Timbers is asking, how well do you think the California courts are doing with putting those in need of social services with the appropriate referral or resources?
Thank you. We are doing our best in the sense that every court, and there are 58 courts because there are 58 counties. So I'll just take Sac Court, for example. All the judges are local and therefore live in Sacramento or live nearby. And they work with the community in Sacramento. So they know what Sacramento County has to offer. And they go out and seek services from the mental health departments and the mental health collaboratives and nonprofits. The same with domestic violence. So every court is different, but it's working in its community, in its county, to bring social services, social justice services to the court, to those in need. Some counties don't have the kinds of resources that Sacramento have. If you live in Trinity or you live in Del Norte, you don't have that kind of education. You don't have that kind of diversity. You don't have that kind of program. So we're doing better in others. Los Angeles does a tremendous job because their community is so involved, and the lawyers and the collaboratives are so involved. So we continue to strive to do better. We continue to reach out. Things have fallen through in COVID because places have closed, but we are always on the lookout for a partnership, a collaborative. We're always on the lookout for a mutual ability to provide services to one another.
Thank you. That, unfortunately, is all we have time for today. I want to thank California Chief Justice Tani Cantil-Sakauye for an outstanding encore performance. And thanks to our wonderful She Shares community for joining us today. We cannot wait to be able to gather again. And hopefully that'll be soon. Until then, everyone, stay safe and thank you.
Thank you. What a privilege. Thank you.
Thank you.